This is the Hakushu Distiller's Reserve. It's meant as a replacement for the old Hakushu 12-year-old. Now, is it good as a replacement? Let's find out in this week's Whisky Review. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Matt, I'm a whiskey nerd, and like I said, this week we're looking at the Hakushu Distiller's Reserve. Now let me just get it into the glass and I'll tell you a bit more about it. The Hakushu Distiller's Reserve is pretty much just a replacement for the old Hakushu 12. Now, while Hakushu itself didn't get as popular as, say, the Yamazaki 12-year-old, a bunch of Japanese whiskies got very, very popular after the explosion of Japanese whiskey in popularity. Unfortunately, this meant that Japanese distillers didn't really have as much stock on hand as they needed to match the international demand, because it takes 12 years to make a Yamazaki 12 or a Hakushu 12. They just didn't have the time to make their whiskies. This led to lines like the Yamazaki 12 and the Hakushu 12 being discontinued temporarily while they produce more whiskey and while they get their whiskey stocks up. And in the meantime, they replaced them with whiskies like this, the Hakushu Distiller's Reserve. This means that this whiskey is going to be a little bit less complex, it is going to be a bit younger, it is just not going to be maybe as good as the Hakushu 12, but it's still using the same components, it's still coming from the same distilleries, it's still being aged in the same cask, so it should be a very similar kind of recreation of that Hakushu 12, just maybe not with the cachet of it and just maybe not with as much depth and complexity. Hakushu is known as being Suntory's smoky whiskey, but because it's Japanese whiskey, it's not really going to be as smoky as a heavily peated scotch. So let's go into it and see how it stands up. Let's go in for the nose. Up front, very green. Very green. Like this is, I'm getting kind of grass, I'm getting kind of hay, but not like the dried hay, more like that kind of fresh hay where it's still on the stalk, it's still in the field. There's some kind of herbal notes coming through here. There's a bit of maybe mint coming through. There's a bit of barley there. Obviously, this is a single malt, so you're going to get that malted barley note coming through, but it's very much dominated by those kind of herbal notes, by those grassy notes, by that minty note. In terms of fruit, I'm not really getting any really like orchard fruits, apples and pears. What I am getting though, it's kind of akin to a melon. Now, not like a really juicy, like a bright shiny watermelon. This is more like a kind of a more subdued, like a honeydew melon, where it's sweet, yes, but it's not like overpowering. It's just like that gentle kind of milder flavor. Overall, it's a very inviting nose. I mean, it's not going to promise you huge amounts of sherry. It's not going to promise you cocoa or smoke or anything like that. It's just kind of a nice, inviting, welcoming nose. So let's go in for the palate. Okay. There's a nice bit of evolution there. So first off, what I noticed as soon as I drank it, citrus. There's a nice bit of citrus that kind of comes through, kind of like a lemon. The juice rather than the peel, rather than that kind of, the dried kind of citrus aroma. It's more like the juice of the lemon, that kind of tart, kind of just sharp flavor you get up front, but in a very pleasant way. That was then followed by a lot of sweetness. There was nice kind of sweet notes. I kind of got a little bit of herbal notes, but then as soon as I swallowed it, the kind of smokiness came through. So I'm going to go in again and see what else I can find. I'm going to look to see if I can find those herbal notes. The herbal notes are there. They take more of a backseat, like that sweetness up front. It's less of like a vanilla sweetness and more of that kind of citrusy, fruity sweetness that comes through. There's a bit of vanilla, there's a bit of oak, and those kind of herbal spices. The mint is probably the strongest one. I wouldn't say I get kind of grassy aromas. I'm not really sure I get a lot of barley on the palate. It's more of that fruitiness, the citrus, the sweetness. A bit of oak actually coming through as well. A nice bit of like kind of dryness, a bit of sharpness coming through from that as well. So it's a nice bit of combination. And then once you take that first breath after you swallow it, you do get that kind of hit of smoke coming through. So I'm going to go in again, but I'm going to go talk about the finish. Okay, definitely the smokiness is in the finish. It's not really there in the nose, it's not there in the palate. I find you do get this with lightly peated whiskies. You don't get that hit of smoke up front. Instead, it delivers it in the palate. It delivers it when some of the other flavors kind of fade away. You get that kind of nice waft of smoke coming through. It serves to kind of highlight the other flavors. The smoke isn't the dominant note, but as those other notes fade away, the smoke does linger on. It kind of gives you a bit of evolution. Speaking of evolution, I find that the Hakushu Distiller's Reserve has a much longer evolution and a much longer kind of tail and finish than, let's say, the Yamazaki Distiller's Reserve, because it does have that bit of complexity with the smoke. You do get a couple of layers that kind of fade away. I typically find Japanese whiskies, they fade away pretty quickly, and this isn't a really long finish, it's more of a medium finish, but it definitely is longer than some other Japanese whiskies I've had. The citrus kind of faded away first, and that was followed then by that sweetness, by the herbal notes, and as those notes fell down, I was able to taste that smoke, so it was a nice bit of evolution. It was a nice kind of change in the glass, change in the finish, and it was made it a little bit more enjoyable. I've only ever had a sample of the Hakushu 12-year-old, and what I had was a lot more development. So the smokiness of the Hakushu 12 was the same amount, I think, as in this Distiller's Reserve, but in terms of the other flavors, those kind of herbal notes, the grassy notes, the citrus, there was more oak. If I recall correctly, it was just a bit more developed, but in terms of the peatiness, the smokiness, the finish, I think it's about the same. But I have only ever had that one sample, so if you've had the Hakushu 12-year-old, or if you do have the Hakushu 12-year-old, let me know in the comments below what you think of it, and if you had the Distiller's Reserve, let me know what you think about how it stacks up against each other. All in all though, I think this is a good whiskey. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing Suntory come out with their 12-year-old expressions again. It might take a few years, and in the meantime, we've got the Distiller's Reserves. They're good, it's a good replacement, but I do hope they do get replaced with those 12-year-olds again, because those are some really good whiskies. And I think that's where I'm going to leave this whiskey review for this week. I put out new reviews every Wednesday and cocktail recipes every Friday, so subscribe, you'll see them all. And until next time, sláinte.